to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. I'm Sheng Peng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find my work at MEC Sharks and at Twitter, Sheng_Peng, Blue Sky, Sheng Peng.
And I'm Keith McNally. You can find my Twitter, halfwall_hockey, my website, half-wallhockey.com, or at San Jose Hockey Now. If you have an astute eye, you might notice this week that our background is a little bit different. And Sheng, you're going to tell us why.
Yeah, we have some big news. We have our first ever podcast sponsor, our first ever title sponsor, Bring Hockey Back, bringhockeyback.net. You know them from their incredible t-shirts, their Director of Vibes t-shirts, their Shorks t-shirts. I actually have a couple of Shorks t-shirts that I'm going to break it out soon. Don't have it right now here in Montreal. But anyway, they also do custom jerseys for hockey league teams, beer league teams, for any event you can think of. So anyway, go to bringhockeyback.net. And anyway, if you know Bring Hockey Back and their incredible t-shirts, they've been doing great Sharks t-shirts for years and years and years. And so as part of our sponsorship deal, and this sponsorship deal, by the way, is going to be for the rest of the season and through the summer. So you're going to be seeing this kind of our Cali Finn look here for quite a while here. Anyway, they're going to bring back Sam Brown and Bring Hockey Back is going to bring back a couple of classic Sharks designs. And so personally hoping that they bring back the Director of Vibes. Not sure what they're going to bring back yet, but they're going to bring back a couple of those just for you guys. But also, too, one shirt that caught my eye at bringhockeyback.net is a Kachuk Brothers t-shirt. So, yeah, there you go. Right, man. I love that slogan in the back, though. Kachuk around and find out. So, anyway, you can get that at bringhockeyback.net. Support them. They are our first ever title sponsor for the podcast. So, welcome aboard. Bring Hockey Back.
And it's been a long time coming, I think, to actually get a real sponsor. And I think this is an awesome sponsor. I love their t-shirts, and very excited to have you guys on board. So this week, before we get to our interview with Kevin Woodley, who is the goaltending expert for NHL.com and InGoal Magazine. He's going to join us this week to talk all about Yaroslav Askarov, future of Sharks goaltending, a little bit about Dustin Wolf and the Calder race, all sorts of fun stuff.
Can I do a reminder, too, that our talk with Kevin was before Askarov's injury. So just wanted to make sure we mentioned that. We'll probably mention it a little later, too. But, yeah, we talked with Kevin before Askarov's injury. But we are going to talk about Askarov's injury, though, and a little bit here.
So that's, it's been a little bit since we recorded with Kevin. Happy to finally get him some airtime. But yes, we're going to talk about Askarov's injury. We're also going to talk about the interesting Nikolai Kovalenko story / non-story from this past couple weeks / story. And then going to wrap up with a few other things, including what Nico Sturm thinks about possibly getting traded at the deadline. Some of the close losses that the Sharks have had this past couple, or these last two games since the break has ended. And then finally the goalie performances in those games. So it's going to be a pretty action-packed show. Maybe more graphics. Actually, probably not. I didn't prepare any more graphics, but maybe next time I'll get more. But yeah, let's start with the Yaroslav Askarov injury and also being sent down to the AHL in the past couple weeks. Does it appear to be serious, Shang? First question.
No, it does not appear to be serious. From what I understand, it is day to day. It is not. It is a lower body injury, but it is not related to the lower body injury that he had throughout training camp. That injury kept him out for a couple of months there, so that was a pretty serious injury. And so it's good to know that it's not that injury. Good break for Yarrow here coming up in a sense of kind of getting himself back refocused. He has struggled a little bit in the AHL since after the AHL All-Star game. I think in the 5 games he's played since the AHL All-Star game, his save percentage is .852. And he has not received all the help in the road to the Barracuda, but he hasn't been as sharp as he can be either. So this is a good reset for him. But most importantly, though, that he is healthy, that he's going to be ready for if the Sharks manage to trade a goalie by the deadline, that they he would be the one they call up, or the Barracuda need him for their Calder Cup run. The Barracuda have been kind of struggling a little bit. Like I mentioned, Askarov is a big part of that, in the sense of he really, when he is on his game, he makes them so much better. We talked about the Podorowski. I did a story actually asking Podorowski about sort of the swagger that he brings to the team.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a goalie that pre-All-Star break has a .938 save percentage, that makes you really, really confident out there. Yeah. So they'll need something like that version. Maybe not a .938 save percentage. That's a lot to expect of anybody. But they'll need something like that whenever Askarov comes back to secure their playoff spot. Like I said, they've been kind of slowly, it's a trickling down the standings just a bit here. I think right now I believe that they are sixth, I think, in the Pacific. Actually, let's take a look at that really quickly. This is really important, all right, because I have not covered, it's not about me, but I have not covered playoff hockey in San Jose since 2019.
They are indeed sixth.
They are sixth. Okay. So I would very much like them to make the playoffs, just to have that. And if Askarov is on, then we can talk about them making a deep run. I don't think that Barracuda, apart from Askarov, are a deep enough team. I have questions about their defense. I don't think they're a good enough team that if he is not lights out, that they make a run. They're not one of those teams that can kind of do it with kind of middling goaltending. And the good thing is that he has the potential to do that, as we saw in the beginning of the season. He has potential to carry them quite a way. But yeah, right now the top 7 teams in the Pacific make the playoffs. Tucson, they're ahead of Tucson by they do it by points percentage. They're ahead of Tucson by a good amount right now. But like I said, they've been kind of following the standings, though. They were kind of contending for the top spot in the Pacific at the beginning of the season, and so they dropped off quite a bit here. And so they'll need him back. No exact timeline on when he'll be back, but hopefully very, very soon. And hopefully it is the Askarov that we are used to seeing in AHL.
Yeah, it's the evolution of a young goaltender. They're going to struggle at sometimes, and he's I think we forget, because he came in pretty hot into the NHL and played a lot of good games, that we're like, oh, he's done. He's going to be in the NHL now. And then it's not always like that. We need a slogan for this show, which is development isn't linear. And then we should just have that in the corner next to the Bring Hockey Back logo. But it's true. And then also, just don't want to spoil any of the Kevin Woodley interview, but lots of good tidbits about how Askarov approaches situations, what are his strengths and what are his weaknesses. So definitely listen to that interview, because it was
it's really, we nerded out on the goalie talk there with Kevin. I do wonder with Askarov if there's some degree of maybe needs that challenge. So when he comes back, let's say in a week or two here, hopefully that challenge of taking the Barracuda to the playoffs, that challenge of maybe going back to NHL for a stint, that challenge of leading the Barracuda to a long Calder Cup playoff run, that maybe that will help lock him back in too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's going to do great. He's been great in the AHL for a long time, so I think he's going to get back up to form. Okay, the most interesting and bizarre story, like I didn't know this was a story, but we should get the facts straight. So I'm going to let you talk on this one.
Okay.
But Nikolai Kovalenko, there was a quote from a Russian. Was it a podcast?
Yeah, he did a podcast interview in Russian.
Yes.
Over the Four Nations break.
Mm-hmm.
And the direct quote from the podcast that nobody disputes, by the way. I had Nikita Sokolov. You guys know his work on the website. He does great work, great stories on Russian players like Mukhamadullin, Askarov, Barabanov last year, Georgy Romanov. So he's done a lot of great stuff with these. Fluent. He was born in Russia, fluent in both English and Russian. So his translation, no one disputes it. And what Kovalenko said on this Russian podcast, and you can find the stories on San Jose Hockey Now if you want to go back to the podcast too. The podcast is also on YouTube too. But the direct quote is, the coach doesn't like Russians. The GM likes Russians. The head coach doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I heard that, and I wanted to really be careful about something like this because this wasn't in English, so I couldn't really make a judgment on the context. On, was he joking? Was he what was it, right? So, but obviously that quote by itself though it definitely stirs the pot, to put it mildly. And so I wanted to make sure to track back and to get some context on it if I could, try to at least. And so I reached out to, at the time, Kovalenko actually is still on IR, and Sharks policy is to not let players on injured reserve talk to media. That's just a general blanket policy of theirs. And so I wasn't going to be able to necessarily talk to him one-on-one. It's not a situation where I could just go up to him. After the Four Nations break was over, the Sharks actually started practice on the 18th, so about a week ago. So it's not a situation where I could just go up to him. And so I asked the Sharks. Well, I told the Sharks it was like, hey, your player said this. Do you know that? Of course, they didn't know that because they're not minding what he's doing on a Russian podcast. And so they did talk with Nikolai. And I think they made sure too that there was no loss of translation here with what he said, right?
Sure.
And so Kovalenko said, this is through Sharks PR, in response to his own comments on the podcast, that the comments that were translated were taken out of context. I do not have any issue with our coach, and everyone has treated me very fairly in San Jose. I love playing here. A couple days ago, we checked back with Warsofsky on it, Ryan Warsofsky, and Warsofsky said he actually had talked with Kovalenko about the comments, but Warsofsky just kind of played it off like everything is fine here. Things get taken out of context, different language, et cetera, and so that's kind of where we're at. That okay, so we'll see what transpires. So I've talked with many Russian speakers. Including actually the person that, thank you, Nick. He's a reader, listener. He's the one that tipped me off on this podcast because I'm not listening to. I don't.
You're not up on your Russian hockey podcasts. You're not listening to them. It's not. I'm
not. If I understood the language, I would be, but I'm not. So he's the one that tipped me off on it. And so speaking to different people, some people think very literally that this is what he meant, of some Russian speakers. And this is not, how do I say it? I've had very split opinions talking with Russian speakers about what Kovalenko's what the context of what Kovalenko said was. I've had people tell me that I think he was joking more. These are all Russian speakers. I've had people tell me, actually, I spoke with a Russian NHL scout, not with the Sharks, so there's no bias there. And he said that he thought that it was more, not necessarily that Kovalenko was joking, but that he was trying to get the podcast host to kind of change the topic on something. And so it was kind of like a throwaway line, so that Kovalenko may not have expected to take off like it did. So that's how that Russian speaker saw it, that it was just something kind of said just to kind of change the topic of conversation. I'm not really sure. Again, all of this is, if you're not sure about it too, I'm kind of in the same boat. It's sort of like, okay, that there does seem to be some gray area with what he said. I guess that's the conclusion, that it's not so cut and dry that he thinks Warsofsky hates Russians, but that it's not so clear that he was 110% joking or whatever either, though.
It could have been like an offhanded, I'm trying to make the host either change the subject or laugh or something, right?
Right. So kind of a joke, right?
But so I my Russian is not good.
Mm-hmm.
I
Do you know some Russian though?
no, I know
Oh, okay. I
zero
thought you
Russian.
were saying that you know.
I
Okay.
know. I was just kind of joking. See, there you go. Now people are gonna be like, there you go. So but yeah, I was reading through the comments on San Jose Hockey Now and other places that from Russian speakers that are like, some of them
Mhm.
say, oh no, he wasn't joking, that was real, and then other
Yeah.
people saying, no, he very clearly was joking. So I
Right.
don't know, guys, get it together. You guys need to come to as a consensus, Russian speakers, and figure out what the answer is. But it sounded so out of the blue. Like I don't even remember anything like, I don't even know, leading up to it in terms of anti-Russian bias from the Sharks at all. Like I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's something that has come to the forefront. So maybe this is the bubbling to the surface, or it's literally nothing.
Right. I don't know. I haven't noticed anything. I'm not looking for it, but obviously Mike Greer loves Russians
Yeah, he
because his
drafted
goaltender of
Igor
the future
Chernyshov. His goaltenders, yeah,
is Russian, and he traded for multiple Russian prospects in the Timo Meyer trade.
yep.
Obviously, a huge trade, right? So, in
I don't
terms
know.
of Warsofsky, I haven't, but of course, while my view is more inside than most people's, it's not. I'm not literally. I'm not a fly on the wall
Mhm.
in discussion and discussions between Warsofsky and Kovalenko and whatnot, right?
Sure.
I haven't seen anything clearly. Obviously, Warsofsky came to his own defense, saying like, "Look, I've coached Russian players in the NHL, and I have good relations with them. I still talk with them. They told me about these comments. He declined to specify which Russian NHL players, but he has coached Kochkov, the goalie in Carolina. That's a big one that comes to mind. A couple others too. So I don't know. I don't know. But on the other hand, though, it could be that there is, one thing that Warsofsky did say in his interview that was really interesting is that he did talk about what he felt was maybe the disconnect with Kovalenko in terms of how the KHL plays versus the NHL.
Hmm. Hmm.
And maybe that may be more the truth that Kovalenko is unhappy about something, and maybe he thinks he should play more on, especially on a Sharks team that isn't very deep. But
Yeah.
Warsofsky is trying to tell him that, look, this is not the way that we play here. And so what Warsofsky said, this is paraphrasing. You got to look back at that story, but this might be closer to the truth that there is something there, but it's not an anti-Russian thing. It can be seen as Warsofsky not liking how Russians play, but I don't even think it's that. It's just a different league. KHL is different ice surface than the NHL. So anyway, the Warsofsky said paraphrase was basically that Russian style, the style that specifically that Kovalenko's KHL team played, Torpedo, which actually is coached by Igor Larionov, is a more kind of puck possession. Whereas in the NHL, it's a little bit more about playing with pace, getting like moving the puck
Hmm.
instead of carrying the puck in and trying to make plays. And that's a very rough. I am not doing what Warsofsky said justice, but I just want to give you a sense so that could be more the disconnect where sometimes Kovalenko's holding on to the puck a little too long and
Sure.
losing it. And what Warsofsky wants him to do is to play with pace, move the puck quicker, get it to your opponent, and then give and go, get in position to get the puck back. And so that could be a little bit more of what's going on there, that it is not necessarily a clash of Warsofsky not liking Russian players,
Yeah.
but more of a clash of hockey ideology, hockey styles, that sort of thing, right? So that might be a little more sort of along the lines of what's going on.
Yeah. It's interesting because I liked some parts of Kovalenko's game in the past when he's been able to play. But then he does disappear a little bit sometimes, and it's interesting comments just because he's a new guy onto the Sharks and he's an RFA at the end of the year. It just is like I didn't expect it, I guess. It's just interesting. And I don't think he's like unhappy like Martin Kaut was like super unhappy here, and he was pretty vocal about that. I don't think that that's the case. It seems like he's happy. So I don't know. Interesting.
I think Cat was unhappy he wasn't in the NHL is more like it,
Yeah.
right? Kovalenko's in the NHL. They're not
Sure.
sending him down to AHL anytime soon. They're not going to risk losing him on waivers.
Yeah.
But I think it's the stylistic thing. I think that's a big part of it because Warsofsky also cited a Ponomarev. I'm probably saying his name wrong, but Ponomarev now with the Penguins. But he had Ponomarev also with the Chicago Wolves. And he actually compared it to that experience with Kovalenko now that Ponomarev wanted to hold on to pucks. And what Warsofsky said was, I'm sure Mike Sullivan, Penguins coach, is saying the same things to him right now. And one of the things that Warsofsky used as a great, actually, this is a good example, is going back to the Four Nations face-off final, USA-Canada. And that game was north-south, moved the puck quick, right? You don't see too much of the puck possession, holding onto it down low, that kind of stuff, right? And that's kind of, like I said, it's not that there's no puck possession in the North American game, but there's a little less of it here than there would be in Russia, bigger ice surface. Here, there's not as much space, so you got to move the puck quick. You got to go, again, north-south. It's not as much east-west in the North American game. And so maybe Kovalenko's unhappy because he looks at the skill level of his team, and this is actually I think a fairly normal thing with players from not just Russian, but players from other countries. And they're like, well, I'm more skilled than this guy and this guy. But it's not just about hockey skills. It's about other parts of the game. And so I think that that's maybe where there is a disconnect here. And more so than what Kovalenko's original quotes kind of suggested. I don't think it's that. That'd be my guess. So what I am curious about, though, of course, is like you mentioned, Kovalenko's an RFA. So very, very curious to see what his decision is, and if he chooses to go back to the KHL after this summer. Maybe that'll tell you a little more of how much he meant his comments, his original comments.
Yeah, and we'll see. Still at the end of the year, there's always post-trade deadline hockey where there is some sort of hero like Klim Kostin last year who, puts up, he wasn't a point a game, but he was like 0.75 points a game or something like that, and tries to force his way into a line. That could happen with Kovalenko too after we
very much so. Yeah.
So we'll see. A guy that probably will be here after the trade deadline is one Nico Sturm.
Probably will not be here.
Yeah, well, I think if I didn't, I meant will not be here.
Yeah.
Is Nico Sturm. Theoretically, if a team is inquiring for his services, I think that he's probably the first one to go at this point from the Sharks roster after Granlund and Ceci were traded. And it seems like he thinks that too, right?
Yeah. I love Nico. Been on the show before, friend of the show. Very, very direct. Doesn't BS you. And he said, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be on the team after the trade deadline. And for Nico, the math is obvious. He is a UFA. He is 29. He has no extension in place. There is no extension in place coming, at least at the moment. And so it's just a question of, it's just like that meme, who want me? Yes or no?
Want me.
And so that's what's going to come down to. If team wants him, and the team will give up a little bit for him. I don't think the Sharks are asking for the moon for a Nico Sturm or any of their other UFAs or pending UFAs. We have Luke Kunin. We have Jan Rutta. Jan Rutta is an interesting case, though, because Jan Rutta is injured and he is not coming back before the trade deadline. So he is very, very interesting to see if a team will trade for him. I would guess that they don't, because you want to see what a player, maybe a conditional trade. Maybe you just trade him for a conditional pick. If he plays a certain number of games, certain number of playoff games, maybe you get like a 5th round pick. Or
if you know that he's going to be on IR until the playoffs and you want to have a 7th defenseman for the playoffs, that doesn't matter, but the cap is, right? Because
but you still need some kind of condition in the sense of he's got to play in a certain number of games. Because you're not, even if you just trade him for your roster, you're not going to give this. He's not a great enough player that like you're going to give up a third round pick, fourth round pick, fifth round pick even, and he plays 0 games for you.
Yeah.
Right. So
got to get that 7th.
no, I figure it'll be like a conditional, like future considerations. But if he plays like 10 playoff games or whatever combo they come up with, that they'll get like a fifth out of him or something. Maybe
That'd be interesting.
that's what I figure, right? And then Sturm, I think, is around the same lines of a return, maybe a fourth. Luke Kunin, a little higher. I've been reaching out to some people about it. There might be a little more value in a Luke Kunin, but it doesn't seem like teams are banging on the door for a Luke Kunin. Also to their goalies too, but the goalies have 9 days here to really raise their trade value. We'll talk about the goaltending in a little bit in relation to the games that they just played. But and then the interesting one, of course, still out there, Mario Ferraro, trade rumor constant. And the one thing that I'll say, reaching out to people, is it's like it's always been that people are really, really split on a Mario Ferraro.
Yeah.
Of course, it just takes one team to like him a lot, or even a couple teams for the bidding war. So we'll throw that in there. But yeah, he's a player that, like in every year, there's a split on him. But I think the reality of it is that he is 26. He's not a young player anymore, and he's not a young up and coming. He's got some promise. He can work out his kinks. I had a very long conversation with the scout about this actually a week ago. That this scout actually really likes Mario a lot, but he's like, man, like, if he was 23 years ago, if you trade for him 3 years ago, you think like, hey, he has some bad habits in his game. We can iron it out. Problem is that he's been around these bad habits for so long. He's not a young player anymore. I don't know if a team thinks now like, hey, I can fix him.
Yeah. The Nick Kiprios from Sportsnet today, trade big board today, actually.
Oh,
and
okay.
the only Shark that was on there was Mario Ferraro. And he said this is obviously their words, but if the Sharks can get the right return for Ferraro, they'll be open to moving the player, but this is not an urgent trade situation because he has another season remaining on his contract, basically.
Right. There's that part of it too, that the Sharks, like we mentioned, if you trade a Ferraro, who plays your minutes?
Yeah.
And that's a problem too. But the biggest problem though over the years is that I feel like Ferraro has been out there for years and years, right? Elliot Friedman has reported for years and years, and no one has met the price.
Yeah.
But the price is falling, though, if we're being real about it, though. I don't know if the Sharks see it that same way. I don't know if the Sharks recognize that the price is falling, but it is. It is. And that's part of the problem of kind of keeping a player, and he's aged out of being a young and upcoming defenseman. And so next year, you might be at a point where you just take what you can get for him if you're not going to re-sign him, or he wants to move on. He wants to win somewhere finally for once. Yeah. So, yeah.
Really tough. It's another player that was like LeBanc last year. It's like, I want to see them play somewhere else. I love Ferraro. I want to see him, like you said, play winning hockey or play hockey somewhere else. And it's not because again, it's not because I don't like Ferraro, but I think that there needed to be an evolution to his game, like you said, 2 or 3 years ago, and it never happened. And so he just hasn't. Same player he's been for a little while.
Yeah. It kind of feels like, I don't know if this is like the right way to express it, but like, so I'm just looking at a screen. Okay, so his value is let's go down. His value is has gone down, right?
Sure.
And I think the Sharks recognize it to some degree, but it's not like the Sharks think it's this. Like, we still want a first round pick for him. But it might be like this, though. It's a little lower, but it's not with the market of where it actually is, kind of.
Yeah. Geometry lessons.
Yeah. So that's kind of when you keep an asset for too long, and that's kind of what happens, I think. And so I think that's kind of what's happening, because I reported, and I still stand by this report, that they had an offer of a second and Jack Drury 2 years ago. I think they take that in the second now, that kind of offer. but that offer wasn't good enough a couple of years ago because I think back then they were thinking first round pick. That was sort of the rumor.
Sure.
It kind of jives with the offer they rejected from Carolina, that they were thinking we can pull a first round from somebody and a prospect. And that was a couple of years ago when he was younger. And again, you have maybe he's still a young defenseman. He still has room to grow. But that runway to grow is sort of, there's not a lot of runway to get that jet up anymore. So,
well, my career will pull off a miracle trade and get us Noah Dobson for Mario Ferraro and
we'll see. Oh, actually, that does remind me. I'm glad you brought him up. I did. I was very curious about this, about the Dobson, Byram, and who's the other guy?
Nemec?
Power.
Oh, and Power. Okay.
Yeah. And I asked one scout, and I just thought the quote was interesting because he kind of just put them all kind of in the same. They're not the same player, but he kind of put them all in the same bucket, which I found interesting. And he says that all of them have the tools. Just comes down to if they actually want to defend and compete.
All right.
So it's hard to be a top pairing guy being too one-dimensional. And so I think that's an interesting kind of bucket. So I guess I understand why fans will want any of these players, but none of these players are close to finished products. So there's that risk. Also, too, going back to the Dobson thing, I've been thinking about again, I'm not seeing why the Islanders would trade him, and again for what the Sharks have.
Doesn't really make sense.
Not seeing it. Yeah, so
and it's not like the Islanders have they've got Ryan Pulock, who I think can move the puck pretty okay, but they don't have a really good grade A puck moving defenseman. They ended up having to go out and get Tony DeAngelo and Adam Boqvist because they don't have one. So it's why would they now suddenly be we don't need that guy that put up 70 points last year?
Buffalo makes a little more sense in the sense that they have three young defensemen in Darlene and Power and Byram, and they probably can't pay all of them. But again, with Byram too, there's questions about his game too. So let's not think that you have your automatic number one defenseman if you trade for any of these guys. But I just found that quote interesting. That just that there's kind of just there's sort of I think a maybe some kind of disconnect in what these what these players actually are, I guess. And what they would be on the Sharks right now. These Sharks are not a good learning environment for young defensemen too, as we've seen. If you think Buffalo is bad, if you think the Islanders bad, the Sharks aren't a great place either for that. I'm not saying don't make the trade for these guys if it's available to you, but that these are trades to tread lightly, that you don't trade for Byram, just plop him in and you gave up a lot for him and he's your number one defenseman for next decade.
Yes. It won't matter. Schaefer will be anyway.
Hopefully. So
okay. So I am happy the NHL is back. It felt like the NHL returned with a flurry. It was just a shit ton of games all at one time. And the Sharks had back-to-backs when they came back. At Calgary and at Winnipeg. Both losses, as is tradition with the San Jose Sharks. But really, really close losses, right? It felt like they were not just in the game, but at certain points, they came out really strong against Winnipeg and I don't know. It felt like certain points that they were the better team, which is almost never how you describe the Sharks this year. But at certain points, it did. And then both of them
in Calgary, maybe not so much Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Anyway, go
on. But yeah, I don't know. I was proud of them in the way that they were playing, and it's a little sad that both of them ended up in losses. But our young guys played well, and I think this is the way the Tankathon season's going to happen. Just more of the same, right? But it seemed like better play overall.
Well, it's better than the Dallas game. That's how that's how they went into Four Nations. It's more like their losses to Vancouver and Montreal in the same week, right before the Four Nations break. This is the standard. This is what they need to do. I thought the Winnipeg game was a great example of they were outshot, I think 34-17. I think 5-on-5 shot attempts. It was like 63-31 Winnipeg. Well, it's one of those things where
they looked okay.
They played, though, to your point, yes. Like they played smart, they played hard. They weren't Winnipeg was out shooting them because Winnipeg is just that much better of a team.
Yes.
But the Sharks weren't turning it over all over the ice and just giving them stuff. They were making Winnipeg earn their stuff, which is good. That's what you need to do. And so I guess, yeah, in that sense of, I think it is right, or it is makes sense, or it's fair for you to be proud of them because that's what they got to do. That's what they did in those games, and that's what they'll have to do the rest of the season. So I guess speaking to that point, like wait till the end of the season to see if you're proud of them because it can really fall off. We saw that last year. Hopefully it doesn't this year. Hopefully they can keep up this kind of level of compete. But I do credit them that they did very much do that in these first two games here. I wasn't sure what they were going to come out with, but that's what they need to keep up. What really did help them, I think, in these games, and this is another part of sort of the whole picture of the Sharks this season, but they got really great goaltending from both Alexandar Georgiev and Vitek Vanecek, and that helped so much. I did a story over the Four Nations break where I think I've been teasing it for a month or so now, like doing a story like this, but I really looked into the micro stats. I tried to figure out where the Sharks are better in important areas and where they're worse than last year. And the conclusion I came up with was actually maybe a little too simple, but their puck possession is better. It's still terrible. It's still league worst, but they have more offensive zone possession than last year. They've also cut down the offensive zone possession defensively too in the defensive zone for the other team. And so those stats are out there. They've cut it noticeably. They also have cut down scoring chances against and scoring chances for. They've raised scoring chances for. They've done both of that. And both are still last place things, still worse. But basically what I try to explain, I think we did mailbag. Someone asked me about this, right? And what I was trying to explain then and what I looked at confirms kind of what I thought a couple months ago, that I put it very simply, that they've gone from historically awful to just they're just a bad team. That's all. They're just a run-of-the-mill bad team now. That's a big difference, though, because last year they were so awful. And so this actually is a very quantifiable improvement, and not quantifiable in points and standings, obviously, but quantifiable in these sort of micro stats that kind of show you that the team is playing better than last year. But the big difference, though, to kind of close up my point, is that it's the goaltending. It's the goaltending, stupid. And I know that that's always like, it's a little too simple to go with that, but I think it really is in this case because last year they had Mackenzie Blackwood for half the season. Mackenzie Blackwood is the kind of guy, we saw this year too, that something about Blackwood is able to, besides his obvious talent, but he's also able to kind of keep his head up in a situation where he's under siege.
Yeah.
And that's actually, as it turns out, I think pretty special to Mackenzie Blackwood. And because we've seen other goalies come and go here, and they have not been able to do this, right? Kakkonen, and now we're watching it with Georgiev and Vanecek, though it's a smaller sample size with Georgiev and Vanecek. But they also have I think, struggled with just being under siege all night. And so I think that we really kind of underrated, I think I mentioned this last episode, but we really underrated Blackwood's ability to kind of keep the team in the game. And so I think it's a really real thing that when the Sharks traded Blackwood, I think they're 10-15-5. And since then, they're like 5-21-3 or something like that. 5-22, 5-21-4. I don't know, something like that, right? And it shows up in the stats too. Blackwood was able to keep his goal save of above expected in a positive on a terrible Sharks team. And Vanecek and Georgiev have not been able to this year. They are among the worst goalies in the league with the Sharks.
Sure.
The Askarov part of the equation that I've mentioned is that if they had gone the season with Blackwood and Askarov, I think that the standings would look a lot different. Those two
Mhm.
would have made a big difference. Wouldn't get the Sharks to the playoffs, but they would actually look. I think I mentioned this last episode. They will look a lot closer to Anaheim in standings.
Yeah.
Anaheim has Dostal and Gibson both playing well, but 5-on-5, they're not really that much a better team than the Sharks. They really are. At least when I looked at all the stats, I looked at scoring chances for, scoring chances against, um, offensive zone possession, both defensively and in your own offensive zone. Anaheim is right in the bottom. Anaheim, Chicago, San Jose. Those are just they basically just switch places
Yeah.
in these kind of micro stats. And so Anaheim's not that much better, but they have Gibson and Dostal. Another part of it too, the other part of that story that I wrote was that the Sharks, at least the under the hood, their penalty kill is actually much better than last year's. But what isn't here anymore? They don't have Blackwood erasing mistakes. The few mistakes that there are the on the penalty kill. They don't have
Mhm.
Askarov up here doing it because Askarov also has, at least in his small sample size, but he's proven to be able to kind of play better than the team. And so in summary, the team is better, but the goaltending is not. And so I think that is what has kind of dragged the team down mostly. Not all. The team has been bad too. So I'm not trying to put it all on Georgiev's doorstep or Vanecek's. One thing that's interesting that I'm looking more into is that the Sharks did tinker with sort of how they play defensively over the Four Nations break.
Yeah.
And so
Somebody
I
had
think
mentioned that. Yeah.
yeah. I wonder if that has something to do with basically trying to support Vanecek and Georgiev more because Vanecek and Georgiev, at least to this point, they aren't Blackwood. They aren't kind of standing on their showing that they can stand on their head.
Sure.
And so credit to the Sharks. It seems like they have played because they're still responding to their coach and still doing what is asked of them. And so they've come up with better defensive performances against Calgary and Winnipeg. And the goaltenders have repaid them in kind. But yeah, I think when you're on a bad or awful team and you also can't trust your goaltending, like we saw like in the month or two before the Four Nations, Sharks would play a pretty good game, but maybe that one goal that would get past Georgiev or Vanecek, and then they would lose. It's just they would lose the game. Now that's just discouraging.
Yeah.
And final point I would say about Georgiev and Vanecek, and actually Kevin Woodley in the interview coming up really talks up Georgiev. He thinks there's a good goalie in there. I think so too. Same with Vanecek too. And sometimes just circumstances. Sometimes it's just a bad year. Maybe some other year, maybe Georgiev is able to stand on his head a bit more for this bad team. But so far, not this year. But some promising signs coming out of the break for the both of them.
Um, you can see it. I mean, the team obviously and you're right. The Winnipeg game, they got outshot by like a crazy amount. Um, they tried to hold back a little bit. It felt like to protect their lead after they got out to it pretty early. Um, but yeah, the team so many times the past year and a half would just get deflated from a single goal. And when you don't give up that goal, like Vanecek wasn't the whole game, it makes them a little bit more confident of a team.
Mhm.
So I liked their performances. I think we could talk like game by game if we wanted to, or just kind of keep mentioning things that we liked. I liked Mukabadulin. I'm going to mention that.
Okay.
Um, I think he looked a little more comfortable, and that's all I asked for Christmas was a more comfortable Mukabadulin, and still making the simple play instead of the high skill play that I think he has the ability to make. He kind of will defer to again making the simple non-mistake hockey, but he does look more comfortable, and I think it's smart of them to just keep him up as long as they can to especially with Rutta injured, just to get him more time. So I still think there's a defender in there, even if he's had kind of a up and down season.
Yeah, I agree that the ability is there, but I am hoping this is a really big stage for him this rest
Yeah.
of the season to really kind of erased a disappointing first half of the season for him. If you look at where he was last season, AHL All-Star, and Sharks have there's plenty of opportunity on the Sharks blue line. And so it has been disappointing to see him not seize a spot.
Sure.
And so now is that time for him. And maybe it begins with him just playing safe and having that foundation, and then slowly kind of let his skill start to take over. Maybe that's the way for him. So hopefully that's what we see. So yeah. I think another player that I liked was Will Smith. Actually, Will Smith has really impressed me out of the break with just his pace. Early in the season, I think he had a lot of trouble in terms of just sometimes he was going too slow, sometimes he was going too fast.
Yeah.
And with the puck and without the puck. And now I think we're seeing just a more confident. I'm not sure if that's the right word because Will is always confident, but he just looks more like he belongs on not just the skill plays, like his shot, which we saw on Halloween, right, against the Blackhawks. Like before, we were just seeing flashes. Oh, this guy is really good, but they were just flashes. But the first couple of games, he just has looked like he fits. And he's not a good top 6 player yet because he's still just 19, right? But he just looks like an NHLer on a ship-to-ship basis. Like I said, more so than ever. So he's the guy that I wasn't sure because obviously he's had downs and ups this season, which is normal for a 19-year-old. But I like what I've seen out of the break from him.
Yeah, I think he's recognizing high danger scoring opportunities a lot better too. Like the times when he needs to join the rush or when he needs to set up a play. It's just about recognizing, I think, and playing with recognize the speed of the game and how the plays develop.
Sure.
And it's been multiple times in the past couple games that you're right. It just looks like he's trying to seize those opportunities. Like he's one of the few guys that can do that. So I really liked his game against Calgary for sure.
Right. Like he's with the play and not behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
In early season, he was behind a lot of plays. Now it seems like he's with the pace of play. Also like too that he's shown a little more sort of in terms of reading the game. Like sometimes it's not time to attack. Just dump it in sometimes. I've seen him do that a couple of times. So yeah, so I think in small ways, I'm liking him more. I think that this was sort of, I know Sharks fans were really kind of freaked out early in season when he struggled. Some fans were really worried when he struggled at the beginning of the season, and so this is kind of the place where maybe they hoped he would be, but this is a place that that you feel comfortable with this guy in the NHL is the point I'm getting at. This is not a guy that needs to be in the AHL or there's an argument for, which there was, like it or not, if you're a Will Smith fan, there was an argument the first couple of months that he might be better served there. But what we're seeing from Will in the last month and a half, he looks like, again, he belongs.
Yeah, I agree. Warsofsky started Alex Wennberg in overtime, and everyone lost their minds. Everybody lost their minds. I think it honestly, I actually don't even think if he hadn't responded in the way that he did, that it would have mattered, right? Because yes, he started Wennberg in overtime, but like Wennberg's still one of the best Sharks that we have. He's still one of the best high skill players that we have. So I wouldn't have made anything of it. I think was it you who asked him or somebody asked him?
I asked him.
Why'd you do it? And he was like, well, he was one of our best players. And I think that's the thing that people were like, was he? Because it felt like maybe Celebrini and Eklund and stuff like that were a little bit more, I don't know. They had a little bit more juice, it felt like.
I actually thought I'm actually more with Warsofsky there. I asked him, but I asked him not because I thought he made this huge mistake. I actually, if you even listen to the question, I just asked, what was your thinking? I wasn't even.
You weren't saying, what are you thinking?
Yeah. I wasn't even suggesting that there was a huge mistake there. I actually thought Wennberg was really good.
I don't think he was bad.
I thought he was better than not just bad. I thought he was good. Just
Okay.
in just subtle areas. Like that's a lot of the things that I appreciate about Wennberg's game. Just his calm with the puck under kind of duress situations, right? His decision making. A lot of that was really, I thought, very much on point in the Winnipeg game. And so I don't have any issue with him saying that, but I think it was maybe the way that kind of he did seem offended or upset by my question, which I personally don't take any. I think I had a commenter mentioned, oh, why does he always seem so short with you? Like, look, like this is like literally his living. This is life and death to him. And so he is an emotional guy, and he is anyway by nature. And so after a tough loss, he's going to be emotional. This is my living, but my living is not predicated on wins or losses. My living is predicated on just the team being there, basically. So, but his living is predicated on wins and losses. And so for him to be emotional, I perfectly understand it. And sometimes I'm going to ask a question that's going to hit a nerve during a kind of a raw time, during an emotional time for him.
Sure.
And it's my job to ask the question still. I think obviously it was a legitimate question. And but yeah, so I think that has something to do with it too. That I think that maybe he thought I was criticizing. I don't know. The way I see it, and I wrote about this, the way I see it is that you start with a more defensive line. I know some people were also bothered by Graf being there, and also Ferraro. He's the one that everybody was, oh, what was he doing out there, right? And so Wennberg and Graf, I'm not sure how they had their pairings kind of set up for 3-on-3, but maybe that's what they had in mind, Wennberg and Graf. And it would have been like maybe Celebrini and Smith or Toffoli, and then, or you can use Smith at center in overtime. Maybe Smith and Zetterlund and Celebrini and Toffoli, or Celebrini and Eklund. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not really sure how they had it figured out, but anyway. So that could be Graf. That's just what they had in mind as Wennberg's kind of partner there in 3-on-3, maybe more defensively minded along with Wennberg, but with enough skill. With Ferraro, actually, I think Ferraro, look, the Sharks don't have a lot of options.
That's fair.
At 3-on-3 overtime. And what Ferraro can do that fits in 3-on-3 overtime. Yes, Ferraro is not the most skilled player, but Ferraro skates like the wind, right? We can agree with that, right? And so in overtime, if you're taking a more defensive posture, that Ferraro is actually the exact guy you would have out there if you're thinking more defense, because he can skate with pretty much anybody, and he can one-on-one compete with virtually any opposition forward. Like, you're not going to put Vlasic out there. You're not going to put Jan Rutta if Rutta was healthy out there, right? So if you're taking a more defensive posture, Ferraro's your clear choice, actually. And besides that, what are your Sharks' choices there? Wallman was a clear one that did not get a chance, but he's your only clear-cut guy. Mukamadulin, Thompson obviously have more offensive talent, run too, than a Ferraro, but none of them can kind of skate and defend like Ferraro can. So anyway, so the idea of a more defensive posture in overtime, and we've seen this with Bob Boughner, David Quinn. Coaches really don't like being asked about this when it blows up in their face too. I've had that experience with Boughner and Quinn. But
yeah, there's been
anyway,
some ones, like I think it was, I can't remember when it was. I think it was Quinn though, that was just like, oh, now it's like our fourth line that got started or something like that. So, but you're right. Yeah, it's all about possession too in overtime. So if you win the puck, you win the faceoff, you win possession. A lot of times you keep the possession for 2 minutes. So it's, yeah, I guess that the point is to start a defensive posture, try and get the puck originally. Maybe you change out really quickly.
Right. Change out, and then you can put your best offensive line. Right. I mean, I remember a couple years ago, Boughner threw out like Matt Nieto against like Connor McDavid.
That's what it was. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. And I think the idea was to get McDavid off the ice, so then you could throw out. I think it was Hurdle and Couture and whoever was out there possible for Boughner to throw out there, and it just when it blows up in your face like it did, then that's when reporters ask questions about it. But in terms of just like strategically, I had no real issue with it. It obviously gets your attention that's how they started overtime, but strategically, again, it's just something that didn't work out. So something they tried didn't work out, and then you move on. So
I mean, at this point, he's going to do anything he can to get a win, right? Like he's probably really desperate to get a win.
oh, for sure.
He's tried everything already. I don't know.
Hey, Wennberg had a great chance. Actually, Wennberg had the first really good chance overtime. Yep. Wennberg puts that in. Wennberg, I think, actually has like 2 of the Sharks' 4 overtime goals this year. Yep. He puts that in. It's a whole different conversation, right? And probably we maybe we don't even ask about why was Wennberg out there, because we're asking about other things, and he doesn't get any credit for the coaching decision there, right? So. Yeah, it's really like, is it what I would have done? Maybe not, but it's not a big deal, though. I guess is my point. So Ferraro being out there too is not a big deal either. Again, like I mentioned, because Ferraro does have actual skills that apply itself in 3-on-3, at least on the defensive end. So
yeah, and he does skate really well, and can retrieve the puck in the corner and skate out with it. Whether or not he actually can do anything in the offensive zone is a little.
Well, then his job is to give it to Wennberg or Celebrini or something.
Yeah, and then they could do something with it.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Anyway, so I think that's about it for this week. We didn't have a lot to talk about after the 4 Nations. There was not a lot of Sharks news or any news really from the league. It was really quiet period, despite the huge success of the 4 Nations face-off. Which is awesome. Just from I had friends that know nothing about hockey that I've been friends with for a long time just tell me that they're watching the game, and they won't, like, I watched it with them and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's just cool. Like, nobody actually, or a lot of people gave a shit about that tournament, and it was awesome. So anyway, just
one of the aftermath of 4 Nations I have found very cool with the Sharks is talking with Warsofsky about players that he asked his young players to kind of look at during 4 Nations. And so my writer, Felicia Keller, wrote a great story about what Warsofsky asked Thompson and Henry Thrun to look at Jacob Slavin more closely. Yep. Warsofsky has also mentioned Celebrini and Eichel, Celebrini and Barkov as couple of players. And then actually just today, I'm working on a Will Smith story, and I asked Warsofsky, was there a guy for Will during 4 Nations? And he mentioned this one was interesting. That's not what I expected, but it was Kyle Connor.
Okay.
So I thought that was an interesting one. So anyway, I think that's one of the cool things about having this sort of this 2-week hockey break, but the best players in the world, and all just like cracking open the textbook for the young Sharks players just to watch these guys.
And you really forget how skilled the game of hockey can be. Like,
right.
Just you
compared
really
to what we watch on a nightly basis here, right?
A, because of the Sharks, and B, just the team's bottom 6s don't contain like all-stars. So it's just every line, every shift is the most ridiculous skill you've seen in a long time. So,
but you see how they play, though, right? How defensively they play, Canada, USA, right? And I think that's like big picture what Warsofsky would like his players, his young players, to get out of a tournament like that. All the skill in the world, of course, that's great, but what is ultimately going to get you to that winning point is going to be a lot of these details and a lot of these defensive habits and things like that we saw out of a lot of the American and Canadian players in this tournament.
And it makes me happy just because I remember a time not so long ago that like the top teams in the NHL were get the puck in deep, turn around, give it to your blue liner, and try and get a deflection goal like that. And they still do that. That's a lot of NHL team strategies, but it was like prevalent throughout the NHL. It felt like every team was point shots and deflections, and point shots, deflections, rebounds, that kind of thing. And that's fine. That's good hockey. But watching the Four Nations, yes, there were still some of those goals, but there's also just like ripping shots from the slot and like super skilled plays that you're right. The details lead up to those plays, like the little bits of compete and the little bits of puck retrieval get you to those parts where you get your Connor McDavid to do Connor McDavid things. But it was just refreshing to see, because it didn't remind me of playoff hockey other than some certain playoff hockey games. It reminded me of something else entirely, and that was fun.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It wasn't ugly hockey.
No,
it was defensive hockey, but it wasn't ugly hockey by any stretch. And I think that's, to your point, that's, you don't necessarily want McIntyre to play muck it up hockey. That's not what you want from his career, right? But you want him to be able to stop up in front of the net, which he does anyways. I'm not telling him anything that he doesn't do, but you want him to stop in front of the net, take his guy. You want him on the rush to skate with this guy. You want Will Smith to skate with this guy on the rush, or William Eklund, or whoever, right? And you can still play great defensive hockey and still be fast and exciting. And that's what we kind of saw. And then you saw that you make that one mistake like Austin Matthews did. I actually thought Matthews did a lot of really good defensive things in the tournament that I saw, but he makes that one mistake. He loses McDavid for just that sec. He can't block that. He can't block that pass. And you work that hard to get that chance, those few chances, right? And that was one of the kind of incredible things about the tournament, to see all that come together. This great defensive hockey, working your ass off to get those few chances that you can get, and then you just got to bury, which Matthews didn't, I think, and then McDavid did. So.
All right, Chang, it's time to get out of here. Let's do a quick read from our sponsor real quick. And then you guys should enjoy the Kevin Woodley interview, which is very informative. Lots of good info, especially if you're a goalie guy or just want to learn more about goalies in general. They're the position of voodoo in the NHL. So,
well, in case you missed the beginning of the podcast, I don't know why you want to listen to the beginning of the podcast, but once again, we have our first title sponsor for our podcast, Bring Hockey Back, bringhockeyback.net. And check out their t-shirts. Awesome t-shirts. Kachuk around and find. Since we're talking about Team USA, can you pull that up again? Kachuk around and find out.
Bam,
there you go. I love that. Kachuk around and find out. Love that. So go to bringhockeyback.net to buy that t-shirt. They also do custom jerseys. That's a big part of what they do. So jerseys for anything, for beer league, for any event that you have, corporate events or whatever, right? Go to bringhockeyback.net, and they're going to be on board with us for the rest of the season and through the summer. And so we'll be talking them up quite a bit. If you do know their stuff already, we're going to bring back couple classic t-shirt designs from them too. Director Vibes, hopefully, maybe some other ones too. And finally, just want to segue too. So I also want to thank, we have other sponsors, not necessarily of the podcast, but sponsors of Sounds Like Hockey Now, that I want to give a quick shout out to before we turn the tables over to this awesome Kevin Woodley interview. So Dean Tate, once again, Dean Tate, Sports Shots. You see all his photography all over Sounds Like Hockey Now. He's the best. Any picture you want to take, your kid at Sharks Ice during one of his games, he's the man for that. Anything. He does swimming, he does football, he does soccer. So anything you want Sports Shots for, go check out Sports Shots. And also too, Kathy's Power Skating, extra hour training. So those guys are great for any of your skating, off ice, hockey training needs. They're the guys to go to.
I love it. I'm going to request that Bring Hockey Back make a development isn't linear t-shirt with like a little bit of a up and down waveform
with your face, maybe?
Or just like a little Sharks logo or something. I don't know. Maybe my face. Yeah. That's what I want. All right, guys. Hope you have a good week. We will see you next time with some more Sharks news. Bye. Joining us this week on the show is Kevin Woodley, goaltending expert for NHL.com and InGoal Magazine. Kevin joins us this week to talk all about Yaroslav Askarov and the future of Sharks goaltending. Welcome, Kevin.
How are you guys?
Very
good. Yep, we're having you on because you are the goalie guy at NHL.com. You also InGoal Magazine too. I've been going into that for years. And so I wanted to have you on. Particularly the thing I really want to drill down on a little bit, we'll get to in a couple questions from now, is Askarov being in the AHL. And is that good for him? What are the benefits? That sort of thing. But before we get to that, though, my first just kind of general question, just to start off, just kind of do kind of a survey of the Sharks and their goaltending in the NHL. What do you think of Askarov's potential and his potential to be? Obviously, he is a talented goalie and he should be a good goalie, but how about being like the best goalie in the league? Does he have that potential? Does he have Shesterkin, Hellebuck potential?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say that you got me right off the bat.
Good question.
There are
elements right there.
Well, there are certainly elements of his game, and there's a reason he was drafted where he was, and there are elements of his game that are exciting and that would indicate that type of potential. I guess the one thing I would say in response is, even if he gets there, it's not going to look like Connor Hellebuck. Like he's very much a different goaltender. There are perhaps some similarities to Igor Shesterkin. In particular, I would say in how well he moves from his knees. So when he's down in a butterfly, his ability to continue not just being mobile, but being mobile and explosive and yet in control. The phrase that was given to me when Shesterkin sort of first broke onto the scene with the Rangers in describing how well he moved from his knees, how well he skated from his knees, was he's like a hovercraft out there. And Askarov kind of has similar qualities. Like his footwork, his skating, his edge work, his ability to sort of move around laterally, not just side to side, but gain rotation, gain angle into movements starting from a butterfly position is one of the things that sort of separates him and sort of puts him in that, it's at an elite level. And so if you were to break down some of the different skill sets and like, are all of them at an elite level? No, there's sort of a mix, and every goalie has a different mix. There are enough elements there that he could get there, very much so. But even if he does, he's never going to be Connor Hellebuck, because the way Connor combines those elements is so different. And the one thing that I think it's too early to get a read on with Yaroslav is how well, and the Sharks will have a better idea of this, but for us from the outside, is how well he processes and reads the game and anticipates. We used to say that Dominik Hasek had a brain like a computer and a body like a slinky. Connor Hellebuck has the brain like a computer. Like Hellebuck's ability to read and anticipate the game is one of the things he does at not just an elite level, but an all-time level. And that's a big component of the success he has. It doesn't mean that Yaroslav needs to do things at that level in terms of anticipation. Very few do. But where does he fit on that scale? And I think you're going to need more reps in the NHL to get a better understanding. And they probably have a glimpse of it from the American League. But even at the American League level, the play tends to be less structured, less controlled, and more scrambled. And so you're in more of a react to the game mode than you are reacting based off anticipation and connecting. Mitch Korn always used to call it the patterns of the game. The ability, the goaltending is not a game of shots, it's a game of patterns. And so the ability to connect those patterns and stay ahead of them, there's all the athletic and skating and movement ability to do so. But at some point, there's also that anticipation element. And I don't have the answer there, both in terms of how good he is at it, how good he can become at it, and where it fits in terms of how important that is to him relative to other guys. Like, I see him as more of a technician with a lot of athleticism. Some goalies move a little more. They're more play readers, but there's a lot more moving parts to their game. And so they're more reliant. And so again, there's everything sort of exists on this, sliding scale, all these different elements, and getting each element dialed in at the right spot of the scale and then trying to improve it. How that blends is how you sort of make the NHL, survive in the NHL, thrive in the NHL, become a star in the NHL. And sometimes those moving parts don't sort of think of it as like a safe. They don't click into the right spot until years and years and years of sort of gaining experience and figuring out, and sometimes different voices, how to slot them in.
Now, would you say that you were mentioning a little bit there that it's not that you don't see that kind of brain with him, it's just that he hasn't had the reps or the exposure yet to really see if it's there. Is it something that you think he needs to improve on, or is it just more of a not
No,
enough reps yet?
yeah, not enough reps for me to see,
I
right?
see.
Like they'll have a better idea of this, and certainly, like listen, like surviving in the NHL and learning the NHL game, especially traffic these days.
Mhm.
I've had this conversation with a number of guys, and we saw it here in Vancouver with Artur Shilovs, right? Like he gets past Nashville, he gets the Canucks to the second round of the playoffs, as you know, by all means a rookie, spends most of the year in the American League, and he is brilliant against Edmonton early on because they're trying to create tic-tac-toe offense and beat him down low, where that athleticism, that dynamic ability to sort of move and explode laterally, you're playing to his strengths. I actually think there are probably some similarities to Askarov in terms of how good he is with his feet and his pads and his legs. Halfway through that series, Edmonton realizes we need to test his ability through traffic. Let's quit playing to his strengths. Let's quit feeding his game. Let's try and find some things he's maybe not as good at. And they went from averaging less than 2 screenshots a game to averaging almost 6 in the final 4 of that series. And those are where pucks went in. And now he gets into the NHL to start the season with Demko injured. And the first thing Calgary does, having gone to school on what happened in the playoffs, is isolate point shots in traffic. And he doesn't have success. And now he's back up now, but he goes back to the American Hockey League. Talked to a number of guys about this, managing traffic. And it's so purposeful now in the NHL. Just going to the net is no longer enough. It's recognizing what lane the goalie's trying to occupy, trying to push him out of that lane, usually short side of a screen, trying to time when you push him out of side of that lane so he changes or shifts his focus or moves around a screen as the shot's being released so he doesn't see it. Like, it's so detailed, and the way that teams go into attacking goalies with traffic, that one takes time, right? And so part of when I say we don't know, it's not at all a criticism. It's me not having had a chance to watch it, and it's him not having had a chance to maybe get enough experience behind it, to truly understand and have seen all those patterns and how to connect them at the fastest level of the game.
Would you say there is anything that you've seen that you think he might need to improve on? I know it's it's still too early, but
I think there's been improvement already. And the one thing that had me skeptical is not a fair word, because you could see the talent, but had me concerned way back to the draft year. And that is how much he relied on pads for low saves. And we talked about how quick he was and how good his skating and recovery from the knees was and how active those pads are. But the reality is, if you aren't using your hands to control pucks at this level and control play, and again, then gaining the experience of knowing when to push a rebound out to the wall to maybe set up a transition offense, when to make sure you eat a puck because momentum is swinging and your team needs a face-off. Like, there's an element of that learning. But also, I just think when I talked about his hands around the draft, it wasn't necessarily a criticism of his glove. Frankly, it was more his blocker, and not his blocker in terms of making blocker saves. It was using the stick so that plays along the ice were steered up into the glass, were steered up into the stands. You got that whistle. Everything was off the pads. And when you have a butterfly as wide as he does, I'm also very much jealous, by the way. Mine is a Jaguar level narrowness. The feet land behind me and the knees point straight out. I don't have that sort of, like, he builds a wall with his pads.
It's a full wall.
Don't ask me mine.
If you think about it though, like if you have that there is a downside to a really wide butterfly. And as a matter of fact, at the highest level, guys select when to use their widest flare and when maybe it's more efficient. They know they have enough coverage without having to go wide to use.
Well, it opens up their 5-hole, right? Like, just to describe it to our listeners, right? If it's a little wide.
Well, no, I mean, it can, you're right. If it gets super wide, it can open up along the ice, but it can open up maybe between the legs because you can't have your knees together and the pads together at the same time. But it really puts rebounds back into the middle. Right? Because if you have a narrow butterfly in the right angles, those pucks get steered into the corner. If it's wide, you're putting everything back out into the middle. And I think I've seen improvements in that since he arrived into the league, because that was one where I'm like, and this dates back a few years, but even just there was so much hype around the draft. When I watched film, I'm like, that's not going to work in North America. That's not going to work in the NHL. Even in the American League, there's way too much net drive. There's way too much traffic. There's way too much focus on pucks off pads and funneling plays, out of lanes off the wall to create that type of offense. If you are not steering those if you're not controlling those low danger shots more sort of precisely than he was coming into the league, you're going to be in trouble. And I do think I've seen improvement in that in terms of how he controls play. And I would expect that just continues to get better. All the tools are there, guys, right? It just takes a little while to refine them. And he's had some moments here where we've seen how good he can be. With time, you are more likely to start to connect those from game to game. Those moments become runs that are more than a period, more than a game. They blend into weeks, and weeks become months. And that's when you become truly elite, is when you can deliver, those reads and that processing and that control at a consistent level consistently over the course of a year. And it's not easy, and it takes time to get there.
What's your perception of some of Askarov's sort of the celebrations, the antics? My position has always been, since the Sharks traded for him, if his teammates are good with it, it's all good. And he seems very, very well liked in the rooms that he's been in. That's at least my perception of it. So, but what is your read on all that?
Well, you would know better than I, Shane, in terms of how it's interpreted within the room. I've certainly, seen and lived through goalies that were traded out of this market because they were maybe in a backup role and they wanted those goalies to be seen and not heard. And the personality was maybe bigger than the results on the ice. And so that's a real thing in hockey. Like let's not ignore it, especially for goalies, right? Drawing attention to yourself in a position where the attention tends to find you quite naturally. Some people might not like it. I have no problem with it. As long as it's in a manner where teammates are a part of it and celebrating it, and by all accounts, as you say, it is. To me, more personality, the better, right? Like, we're the only position in sport that gets to show off a little bit of our personality with our custom pads and custom masks and all those things. Why not bring a little bit of that flair to the game? I mean, the kid handles the puck unbelievably. There is a certain swagger and confidence that can come with that. And I'll put it this way. We had a conversation recently on the InGoal Radio podcast with the goalie who talked about being himself and how some of his early struggles in his career were thinking he had to conform to the box that hockey traditionally puts a goaltender, especially a backup goaltender.
Sure.
Not just the seen and not heard, but hey, you're a goalie. On game day, you better be quiet and laser focused and doing all your pregame stuff and don't talk to anyone. And there are goalies that needed that, right? Henrik Lundqvist was one of the greatest of all time. Jerseys over the shoulder here and famous for it, right? Like that burning intensity. But if that's not your personality, then you there's an element of having to be true to yourself here. And so this was a young goalie who struggled early in his career. It wasn't until a sports psychologist just sort of said to him, like, this isn't who you are, being quiet and intense. Like, you can still have an intensity while talking to everyone on a game day because that's your personality. Trying to change who you are to fit into a narrative of what a goalie should be, you're kind of living a double life. And that sounds a little extreme, but if you're trying to enter a flow state and achieve this sort of ultimate balance between the intensity required to succeed in the position, but also have a relaxed approach, like tension is the enemy of goaltending, right? As soon as we see a goalie who gets too tensed up, you're not reacting naturally. You're not at your peak reactivity. And so if you're asking somebody to be who they're not, I don't think that sort of lends itself to success long-term. And so if this is who he is and it's nobody else has a problem with it, making sure you find a way that people recognize that and understand that. I don't know why you would try and create a conformist when essentially what you're doing is telling somebody to not be who they are, but then ask them to be the best version of themselves. It's kind of that conversation recently with that goalie opened my eyes to just how much, his sports psychologist told him, like, you are essentially trying to succeed in the hardest league in the world, and you spend your whole game day prep trying to be something you're not. Doesn't sound like a recipe for success to me.
Oh, that sounds like a fascinating podcast. Who is the goalie, and about where can people find the podcast? Like about what month or so?
It's so funny because as I was like not giving the name, I'm like, hold on, we said this, like he was open with this. This wasn't an off the record conversation. My tendency, my inclination was to not share the name but it was Eric Comrie, right? Like it was Eric Comrie, and you look at the success he's having this year with the Jets. Yeah. And I know Hellebuck casts a long shadow, but when you think about the role he plays, some of the games he gets, like he's having a really good year for them. Right. And so we've heard it from other guys before, but Eric was brave enough to go sort of on the record with it and talk openly and honestly about how a sports psychologist made him recognize that, hey, like, and Coms reminds me a little bit of Askarov. I don't know Yaroslav well, but that bubbly personality, that engaging, inviting, outgoing personality, talking to anyone. Again, if that's who he is, and you try and suppress that, how can you ask him to be the best version of himself when you're asking him to pretend to be something he's not? And that's essentially paraphrasing. But what Eric Comrie told us, I think it was about a couple months ago on the InGoal Radio podcast.
Okay, well, that sounds like a great interview, so you guys should listen to that. I did want to say about Askarov that one of the things I've noticed, I've written a lot about this, that he's a guy, doesn't matter win or lose, doesn't matter how the game went, comes up to the media scrum. He's like, hey, what's up, guys? Never had anybody do that before. I thought that was so interesting. It doesn't matter, forward, goalie, defenseman, never had anyone with that sort of positivity, that sort of bubbliness, I guess, win or lose, because of course after you lose you're supposed to be like like that, right? And he doesn't conform to that, and I think that's great. I think I do give the Sharks a lot of credit for that I think that they're trying to create a team, not of personalities, but a team of letting personalities be themselves. And actually, I think that's what Doug Wilson did well, too. That's a whole different story, but with guys like Brent Burns and Joe Thornton, but that's a whole different story. But I think that leads, though, to my next question about Askarov. And why did Nashville, in your perception, choose Saros over Askarov? And was this one of those things, because you listen to Barry Trotz talk about Askarov, and it sounded like maybe they were looking for a goalie with maybe more of a fit-in personality and not a fit-out personality.
I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, and I didn't follow it obviously as close as you guys. Like knowing some people in the Nashville organization, I'm not sure. And there were other people who believe this too around the league, that not everyone saw the talent as matching the draft pick, right? Like, fair or not, and it's up to him to sort of prove it, that the pedigree and the expectations that come with the pedigree and in terms of opportunity and when that should happen, did they believe in the talent at the same level? I'm not sure. In terms of personality, I just don't know. I mean, listen, investing in UC Saros is not a bad thing. Even this year, I know the Four Nations didn't go the way he wanted, and the play has fallen off. But like when I was watching the Predators for the first third of the season, I was like, oh my God, they are wasting an incredible year by UC Saros. Now it's fallen off as the quality of chances he's faced continues to pile up. I think maintaining success behind a bad defensive team over a long period of time is really hard. But the first
we've seen that with the Sharks.
Yeah, I mean, the first third of the season, however, he was like top 5 in most of the adjusted numbers, top 10 in all of them. Like he was having a hell of a year. Nobody could see it because the environment was so bad for him. I believe that he's shown he can be an elite number 1 goaltender. At the end of the day, once you make that commitment, the question becomes, what do you do with the guy behind him? And right or wrong, they've played the wheels off him. I shouldn't say that because he handles it better, but they played him at a level that nobody else in the league is playing at outside of maybe Hellebuck, and Saros is actually playing more. So where are those opportunities for Yaroslav, even if they brought him in as the backup, and we're seeing now how good Kevin Lankinen was. So beating him up for that job the previous 2 years never should have been a slam dunk. But you don't want him not playing.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reality of UC Saros being there is even when he moves into the backup role, it was going to be a once every 2 week job, not a once a week job, most likely, just because of how much they play UC Saros. So I think there are a lot of different elements in there. Obviously, there's some changes in terms of who came in. I talked about Mitch Korn, game of patterns, not shots. He's now involved there as a director of goaltending. And maybe some of the opinions on when he was drafted to now have changed a little bit or shifted. At the end of the day, once you're locked in on Saros, and if you're Askarov, you want this too. I'm never going to be the guy here. This guy's locked in for 8 years? Give me a chance to do it somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Any criticism of Askarov for wanting out of there, they signed a goalie for 8 years at $6 million plus or $7 million plus. You're not gonna be a starter for 8 years. You can't live under that. So I totally understand him wanting out there. But going to Askarov here in San Jose, so that decision to have Askarov kind of learn in the AHL this year, for the most part, there have been a lot of injuries with the Sharks, and of course they traded Blackwood too, but kind of pushed him forward a little bit. But what's kind of the benefit for Askarov to be in the AHL this year? It's already his third full year in the AHL. It's actually his third straight AHL All-Star appearance. So what does it benefit him to be down there with the Barracuda instead of up with the Sharks and getting those reps that we talked about?
Yeah, it comes a point where it's a fair question whether it is. Obviously, they don't feel we're at that point now. You do get a lot more practice time in the American League. As you guys know, it's typically, although I know in California there can be some midweek games with teams that are closer by, but it's typically a weekend league, which leaves you a lot of time.
Yep.
And with a countryman in Evgeny Nabokov, as I understand it, who's handling a lot of those reps in the American Hockey League level. Again, you guys are closer to it than I am, but Nabby's one of my favorites, and he's got a real great way of blending. Like, he's a guy that's consistently tried to learn and understand the evolution of the game and the modernizing of goaltending and goaltending coaching, but he also brings a lot of sort of old school flair and understanding and intelligence to the position. And so time with him is not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think there's going to come a point in time here where, like I said, it's a different game. It's more controlled. Now, what you've got to decide if you're San Jose, given some of the moves they've made, you lose a CC, you lose a Granlund, who's an elite defensive forward. What does that environment look like? So at some point, the question becomes, the AHL isn't the NHL, but is the way we're playing up in the NHL right now also going to resemble how we're going to play when we need him to be the best? And so I don't have that answer. But that's part of, I would imagine, the decision-making process. To me, ultimately, to succeed in the NHL, you need experience up there. As long as it's not at the expense of sitting around and getting stale, I think there is value at some point in this season in getting him back up here. Look at Dustin Wolf. Look at the year he's having. For him, a lot of late last season, when it didn't always go that well, and there were questions, there were times he was trying to change things because, the NHL, I've got to change how I play. And sort of it helped him sort of go back to some of the things that made him American Hockey League MVP and goalie of the year prior. Like, you have to develop a confidence in how you play and a belief in your system and that it's going to translate at the next level up. And so late season reps, as long as, they're not giving you a blindfold and a cigarette and basically saying, go out and stop, 30 high danger chances tonight because we don't have an NHL team anymore. They can pay dividends the following season. As long as there's the right approach mentally and conversations about, sort of doing this the right way and not, I know it sucks and it's hard to sort of say this, but like not become too results oriented, like recognize that there's a process here and the team has to be a part of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great metaphor for being a Sharks goaltender for the last couple of years, a cigarette and good luck. So that makes sense too for Askarov. And obviously his time is coming too. You never know at the trade deadline what's going to happen with either their goalies, and also too Askarov's contract. Right now he's on his DLC. Next year he's not. So his time is coming soon regardless.
And speaking of the Sharks 2 goalies that are up right now, do you see either of Georgiev or Vanecek kind of sticking around in San Jose? And if not, what type of goalie do you think that they're going to go after for like a 1A, 1B kind of thing with Askarov next year?
Yeah, what's a good fit, personality wise too, for Askarov too?
Oh, that's a you know what, I hadn't thought of that one. You guys got good questions.
Yeah, we're plugged in, man.
You guys are not making this easy. Listen, I know contract status wise, like I believe that Alexandar Georgiev is a really good goaltender and can be in the National Hockey League. Mm-hmm. I covered that Colorado-Seattle playoff series a couple of years ago, and I know Colorado ultimately lost it, but it certainly wasn't on him. I like his game. There's a goalie there. I think they're going to try, and we talked about tension being the enemy of goaltending. I think there is a little bit of rigidness in his game at times that has come into his game since he left New York. That they maybe try and sort of back off a little bit, like just get him playing a little more relaxed, because the power's there, the movement's there, the skating's there. Like there's a lot of really nice elements to his game. But again, it's really hard to do that in an environment where you're being asked at times to stop bullets in your teeth. And, when I look at the, high danger stuff, like 5-on-5 expected goals against, high danger, like 32nd in the league. 24th off the rush, which is decent, and 14th on the PK, but 29th in zone. So that's a lot to ask any goaltender, especially over time. What does it look like long? I honestly, guys, I don't have an answer of who would be an ideal fit. I'd really have to take a look. It's a hell of a question, and I wish I'd put more thought into that. You do want to be cognizant of not everybody is a good partnership goaltender.
Yeah.
Right. Like some guys build partnerships and they know they're there to nurture. There are other guys who have been great people, but never had a relationship with their playing partner at any stop along the way. I'm not going to name names on that, but like there are some guys who like they just, hey man, like I'm competing with that guy. I am not here to be his buddy.
Yeah.
And
you can say it, Aaron Rodgers. You can say it, the name.
Well, I mean, hey, like, listen, former Green Bay Packers fan. So, you look at the relationship of a guy like Ullmark and the importance he had with a guy like Swayman. And obviously, Linus is an elite goaltender in his own right, and clearly, commanded an elite level contract in Ottawa, the opportunity to be the number one guy. But don't underestimate the importance of sort of finding that. And I don't know what the relationship is right now with those two guys, how they feed off each other, whether, like from a language perspective, obviously some commonality there that might help. It is important, though, and I've had this put to me by a number of guys, to have that mentor. And we've, Stuart Skinner had Mike Smith. And, some of the other guys that went through Edmonton before, when they didn't really have a guy with the veteran experience of a Mike Smith, like, not having that leadership role to sort of show you how to behave. Like to your point about not wanting to change your personality, Shane, like you don't, but there are probably nights where going out with a big smile, like just in terms of how that might be interpreted by teammates, there are probably some nights where it doesn't work. And having somebody sort of tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, like be yourself, but there's a gravity to tonight's situation.
Yeah, read the room a little.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that is not at all a criticism. But that experience, especially as you move up from backup to starter, and you lose that practice time that he has right now in the American Hockey League on a regular basis. And now you're not working on the technical and the tactical. You don't have time to manage your game because you're trying to manage your rest. We hear the phrase learning to be a pro all the time. Well, who teaches, right? Like, it's a cliche, but there's some reality to it. There's some habits that to succeed at the highest level, you need to have. And I don't know him well enough to know how many of those things are already in place in terms of what he does off the ice, how he takes care of himself physically and mentally. what kind of coaching he gets independently outside of the team on those elements. But having somebody around that has been there, done that at a high level for a long time to help guide the way. I've had a lot of goalie coaches that think it's really important to have that mentor. We talked about Saros, right? Pekka Rinne was that guy for him. And
Sure,
you don't always have a future Hall of Famer like Corey Schneider did with Roberto Luongo to be there for you, but some of that experience, and maybe Nabby brings enough of it, but usually you need it in a playing partner as opposed to a coach and somebody who's in management right there. And Nabby will be familiar with this because, Wayne Thomas was a dual role coach and had a management role when he was there in a coaching role. And so, I remember having that conversation with goalies, like needing to know that they could have that open relationship with a coach versus somebody in management, and talking about the importance of that. So I think having a playing partner that can help with those things without being able to give you guys a name, don't devalue how important that can be for a young goaltender coming up.
No, absolutely. Yep.
And you had actually mentioned them earlier. This is kind of going to shift gears a little bit, but it seems like for the past few years, there's been probably a handful of names of young guys that have come up through the goalie ranks as like the future maybe stars of the NHL. And you mentioned one already in Dustin Wolf. But how do you see the three guys that I have in mind? Wolf, Askarov, and Jesper Wallstedt. How do you rank those from a 1, 2, 3 perspective? And is there any other names that you can think of that are kind of in that discussion? I know it's hard to rank like that, but we get hard questions here on this.
Yeah, you guys are not pulling any punches. I'm not.
You're the goalie guy, all right?
I'm going to reserve the right to rank because I have not seen enough of Yaroslav and I haven't seen enough of Jesper. I'm a fan of both of their games. Right now, it'll be hard not to put Wolf at the top of that list, right? Sure. Like he's having success in the NHL right now and having success at a, maybe not a Vezina Trophy level, but I look at the adjusted numbers and he's near the top in a lot of them. Like he's been really, really good. And I think he's built a game that, ironically goes against a lot of the cliches that come with the questions he's had to answer since he was drafted. And in his case, almost not drafted here in Vancouver because of his size. Like, people think a small goalie's got to be more aggressive. Like watch Dustin Wolf play. He's almost never, unless he reads like a rush chance with no passing threat and the proper defensive zone coverage where he can take a step out on a guy and just bury angle by being aggressive. He's almost never outside of the blue paint. And he manages his depth at a level that I think is beyond his years experience-wise and maybe a sign of where things are going with the game. In terms of all the East-West plays. He doesn't approach depth just from a North-South equation. It's very much within the posts as well. And so there's a maturity to Dustin's game that, from an experience standpoint and the ability to apply it, and you look at the awards he's won in the American Hockey League already, it would be hard for me to rank him ahead of either of the other two right now. But I also happen to believe in the potential of both those guys you mentioned. I'm a big Jesper Wallstedt fan. I haven't had a chance to watch as much in the American League since he was drafted, but I've talked to people in the Minnesota organization. Just a matter of time before he gets there as well. And I believe his impact, again, with time to make some of these adjustments, is going to be significant for a long time as well. Other names, it's funny. It kind of shifts. Like those are the guys. Like, look at Pass and Sebastian Cossa, right? Yep. Who, was a first round pick and for the longest time was linked, like Askarov, right? Like Wallstedt, sort of as those high, ironically, Wolfie gets there first and he was almost dead last in his draft, but, worried about not getting picked. But, the path they've chosen for him, the patient path, starting him in the ECHL, allowing him to ripen and now look at the success he's having in the American Hockey League. With that big frame, with the experience he's developed, will it translate to the NHL? I can't wait to find out because, I believe in the package there. And even if maybe could have made and did make at the time the argument, I'm not sure it matched where he was picked. There's still a lot to like there and still plenty of time to prove that he was worthy of it. And it looks like he's well on his way to doing it. They're just not in a rush for him to get there. And I think that the reps he's getting at the lower levels and the success he's having will just allow him to continue to build confidence that his game will translate when he does.
Okay, we just have one more question for you. It's not an easy one, though. It's another kind of long view question, just to warn you.
Why start now?
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. What's your perception of the work that Nabokov, now director of goaltending with the Sharks, Thomas Spear, goaltending coach, Ryan Miller, goaltending scout, that what have they done as the Sharks goalie guys since Mike Grier took over? From kind of the outside, the perception is that the Sharks organization seems to have gotten right since Mike Grier took over. Before that, they had sort of that Adin Hill debacle, and actually it was Mike who traded Adin Hill, but it wasn't Mike who traded for Adin Hill. And then there was Middleton for Kakinen that happened the year before. It was very confusing time, I think, between the pipes for the Sharks, because they had two heir apparents in 1 year in Hill and Kakinen. It just didn't make any sense. Anyway, it seems like they've gotten right over the last couple of years, from Blackwood to Askarov. But anyway, just your perception of how the Sharks have done.
Well, it's funny. I talked to Ryan a little bit about sort of his move into this side of things. He was at the USA Hockey National Goaltending Symposium, first one ever this summer in Minnesota, and just informally and stuff. And so I don't have a clear picture about how each person fit into that department specifically, but it sure sounded like there was a groupthink approach to it. And I really like that. I think when you look at Wolf and you look at Calgary and you look at the job they've done, they've got a director, they've got an American League guy, they've got an NHL guy, and they're in contact all the time, right?
Oh, and we were remiss to say, not to mention that, or to mention, if we didn't mention that, Thomas Spear was a big part of Wolf's development in Stockton, just to give.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he knows what that's like. I am a big fan of Thomas Spear and the work he does. I've had the pleasure of being on the ice with Thomas as he coaches goalies, both NHL guys and junior kids, up at a camp that was run in Kelowna, sort of an agency and an off-ice strength conditioning camp put on every summer until last summer. And Thomas was up there for a couple of years. And so I've watched him work, and I am a big fan of his approach, the way he coaches at different levels, at different, like sort of with different age groups. And I like Ryan Miller's clearly, so intelligent and so well thought out when it comes to the position. And you already heard me talk about how much I believe in Nabby and sort of his desire to continue modernizing without losing touch with some of the roots of the game. And so you put those three together, I think the more that they're working together, the better. Like, that's positive. Can't really speak to all their moves because I'm not sure entirely. Like, sometimes moves are not made for the short term, right? Like, sometimes you go and get guys and you're just getting them to fill a spot temporarily. And if you can turn them into an asset, great. I mean, I think Mackenzie Blackwood became an asset for them, a positive asset. I'm not sure how positively, he would have been regarded coming there, but they turned him into a positive asset. I really like the individuals involved. I haven't talked to them about how they interact specifically together and whose roles are what. But the fact there is interaction amongst the three of them, like, I think that's the right way to do things. We often see directors and, a bit of a break between the NHL and AHL. There are, again, not going to name names, but I do know in some organizations where NHL and AHL guys barely talk to each other. There isn't that groupthink. There isn't that shared, like, hey, I'm dealing with this. How have you experienced it before? That I don't say there's not a camaraderie, but it's not at the level of what we see in Calgary and what from at least I understand is going on in San Jose. And so when you have people as brilliant as those three, when it comes to the position, working together, to me, only good things can happen. It's so much better than the alternative. And nice to see the Sharks embracing a larger department. Does somebody end up being a goaltender? Like, I don't know if Nabby's wearing that director hat as well as this, but we're seeing teams continue to expand those departments into 4 and 5. That's never a bad thing. And I think it's positive that the Sharks are, amongst the group that has multiple voices and created sort of a group think around the position with guys who think it as well as anyone.
I'm fairly sure between Nabokov and Miller that the Sharks have the most goalie wins in their goalie department in the entire league. I'm not sure about that though,
That
but
might be.
anyway,
It
maybe
might just
Well,
be. We gotta count that.
gotta count that. But Kevin, thanks so much for being here with us. Before we let you go, anything that you want to plug, anything that you have going on right now that you want to let us know about?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a goalie, InGoal Magazine, InGoalMag.com. Obviously, I have the NHL.com work, and we run a goalie column there every 2 weeks. Thanks to my bosses for letting me do that. But if you're a goalie, we do some things at InGoalMag.com that nobody else does, including video sessions with NHL goalies where they watch saves and explain to us. I talked about the play reading with Askarov, being able to sort of anticipate what's coming. NHL goalies sit down and watch video with us and explain what they're looking for and why, and how their reaction, whether it's the depth they choose, the post-integration technique, why they choose it, why they choose a certain save selection, why they might go paddle down to cut off a pass in one situation but would advise against it in the other. And so I don't think anybody does that. The idea is to allow young goalies to see how NHL guys process the game so that they can get some of that thinking into their game. We've been doing it for 3 years now. There's like over 200 of them online right now. If you become a subscriber, you get the full archive. So we're just about to launch a goalie school guide for the first time in 10 years because we're geniuses. It went really well 10 years ago, and we didn't run one since. Don't get me started on why it took so long. But yeah, so if you're looking for resources dedicated to goaltending, the premium product with the videos and everything is a subscription product. But at $50 Canadian, I think that's just like 2 cups of coffee in the States, the way the exchange rate's going. So whether you're a beer leaguer,
exactly.
Yeah, there you go. So whether you're a beer leaguer like me, a young goalie, or I think really importantly, a goalie parent, we have a section dedicated entirely to that. We've got something for you at InGoalMag.com that'll help you stop more pucks.
What a
Well,
promo.
Kevin,
that was amazing.
Yeah.
may have done this a few times over the years.
Maybe once or twice. Thank you so much, Kevin. This was
Kevin, thanks so much for the time, man.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Really enjoyed being on. I'm looking forward to following Yaroslav's career here and hopefully connect with you guys again as it continues to progress.
We'll try to have
man.
easier questions next time. Like
I can't promise
what are you eating
that.
for dinner?
I can't promise that. I can't promise
Next time I'm just going to get a few of them in advance because it's not that I don't want to answer them, but I want to do the homework. So next time we'll send me a few in advance and I'll dig in and do a little work for you.
Love it. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, man.